morning, everyone. My name is Quinn Godwin, and I'm the Associate Director of the American Indian Heritage Commission, which is part of the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. I want to welcome everybody for joining us in person today, and also for the people we have watching online. Thank you for being here and helping us honor American Indian Heritage Month. Each November, DNCR highlights the history, cultures, and ongoing contributions of American Indian communities in our state. The AIHC works throughout the year with tribal nations and urban Indian organizations to ensure that Native stories are preserved, protected, and shared with accuracy and respect. Today's event reflects that mission. It is my honor to introduce our speaker, Dr. Seth B. Grooms, a citizen of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina and an emerging leader in Southeastern archaeology. Dr. Grooms is an assistant professor of anthropology at Appalachian State University, where he teaches archaeology using approaches that combine scientific research with indigenous knowledge and community perspectives. His research focuses on the eastern woodlands, including work in Mississippi and Louisiana, where he studies monumental landscapes and the mound-building traditions connected to the Poverty Point cultural phenomenon. By using geoarchaeology, landscape archaeology, and advanced chronological modeling, Dr. Grooms explores how ancient indigenous communities shaped their environments and how these places supported cultural and ceremonial life. What makes Dr. Grooms an important voice in this field is his commitment to centering Native perspectives in archaeological interpretation. He is part of a new generation of Native archaeologists who emphasize that the stories archaeology tells should be guided by the descendants of the people being studied. His work promotes accuracy, respect, and meaningful collaboration with tribal communities. Today's lecture, Archaeology and American Indian Perspective, invites us to think differently about how we understand the past and whose knowledge we rely on in that process. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Seth B. Grooms.
Good morning, everybody. That was the best introduction I've ever gotten. Thank you, Quinn. Wow. I don't have anything to say on this slide. I was going to tell you my name and everything like that, but I appreciate everyone for being here today. I want to especially thank the DNCR, the OSA folks who are here, and the Heritage Commission, Director Carrie Bird, and Secretary Cashwell, and Associate Director Quinn here. Godwin, excuse me. So thank you all again for being here. I want to start with this. This is something that is kind of unique to this setting. I wouldn't typically indulge in kind of personal matters as a scholar, but given the American Indian Heritage Commission invited me here today, and the Heritage Celebration begins tomorrow, I think it's fitting to briefly reflect on heritage. Like Quinn said, I'm a Lumbee citizen. I grew up in Richmond County, North Carolina, way out in the woods near Ellerby. These are some of my ancestors. Many of them dealt with land theft, attempts to reduce their civil rights by slick legislators. They navigated oppressive economic conditions. My grandparents' generation endured a tri-racially segregated North Carolina. That generation literally fought oppressors like the KKK at Hayes Pond. And despite these experiences, like many Native families, they endured while being exemplary citizens. They worked hard and stuck together. My grandmother, Virginia, top right, your top left corner, she raised 7 children, and she's one of the toughest and fiercest people I've ever known. Like many Native people, they served their country at a higher rate than others. They served in 2 world wars. My father and uncles were Marines during the Vietnam era. They're down here center, at the bottom center. I continued that tradition and became a Marine myself and served in Iraq. So as I discuss archaeology today from a Native American perspective, my hope is that everyone in this room, not just Native people, keep our ancestors in mind and keep their memory alive and draw on their memory and remember how resilient they were facing challenges of their generation so we can maybe face challenges of our generation with the same resilience. So this is an image of the Bowie Mound. the Bowie Mound marker that the DNCR put up on the highway near Red Springs in Robeson County. I have this image up here, and that's Director Bird and Chairman John Lowry and Nancy Strickland Chavis, the director of the Museum of the Southeast American Indian at UNCP, and her husband, Harlan Chavis, who's the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Lumbee Tribe. And they're unveiling the signage there. And I think that this site and the sign is a great example in one place of how far archaeology has come with Native communities. Clearly, right now in this literal photo, there are no archaeologists involved here, but archaeology has a long history at the Bowie Mound, or it's also been called the Red Springs Mound. There's been a lot of looting at that by amateurs at that site. Human remains have been disturbed. There were salvage archaeological excavations carried out in the 70s by professionals trying to salvage the archaeology of that mound. But it's been the site of a lot of contention too, because in the 1970s there was a group of Native protesters that essentially ran off the archaeologists doing work there at that mound, and so to see it now, one of my projects is working near the mound. We're not disturbing the mound, but we're working near it, and to see Native people involved in that project, involved with developing the research questions along professional archaeologists. To think that, again, in 1974, those confrontations between Native community members and archaeologists were so contentious, to today, we have North Carolina government entities commemorating that mound, and also Native communities working with archaeologists. So when I was asked to give this talk, it was, the only kind of guidance they had when they requested that I come and talk today was that to talk about archaeology in Native communities, right, from a Native American perspective. So I think the best way for me to do that faithfully is talk from my own experiences that I know best, right, and not do a wide-ranging kind of historical treatment of these relationships, but start in Robeson County with my community and where I'm doing ongoing work. And I think Bowie Mound is a great starting point for that. The project that I started a few years ago, 2.5 years ago or so, with colleagues from the Lumbee Tribe. It's called the Lumbee River Archaeology Project. We call it LRAP for short. The way that project came to be, one of the ways that it came to be, were through my experiences earlier in my archaeological career working with Native communities. So this image is a picture of me working with a colleague from the Crow Indian Nation out in Montana with their TIPO. And they had invited archaeologists out to the Crow Reservation because they were interested in documenting ancestral buffalo kill sites, bison jumps on their ancestral hunting lands that were on the reservation. And so that's why we were there as archaeologists, working with the TIPO there. And my job there as a junior archaeologist was to just lead field crews out on survey on the reservation there and train some of the TIPO staff in archaeological methods. And so that's what we're doing here, more or less. And that project was a great experience early on in my career because it showed me what it looked like when a tribal community in a TIPO were the ones kind of leading a research project. And how amazing that collaboration was between the Crow TIPO and us as archaeologists there. It was a great experience, and I didn't know at the time how formative it was going to be for my career. But it ended up inspiring a lot or influencing me a lot when I arrived at a position in my career where I could formulate and lead a project myself. That is what I thought back to, those experiences and what that looked like, right? Like including elders and taking care of, like, thinking about the logistics of things like elders coming out to remote sites, or all of this stuff as like the logistics of doing archaeology and not just the technicalities of research, like thinking about it as a community experience and how important it is for that kind of involvement. So that was a formative experience and led me to hooking up with the community leaders that I ended up creating LRAP with. These two scholars, these two colleagues are both environmental scientists, Dr. Ron Emanuel and Dr. Lydia Jennings. Ryan is a Lumbee citizen and Lydia is a Pascagoula Yaqui citizen. And we were talking last year at the UNC Pembroke's Southeastern Indian Studies Conference, and it was just the three of us. We were just sitting under the kids' arbor there, you know, and we were just casually talking about working with our communities. They were talking about their work with environmental justice and things with tribes. And we all agreed, and myself as an archaeologist, we all started talking about, we kept bringing up independently, talking about how important water, ancestral water, rivers, right? Ancestral water and ancestral land is, no matter really what kind of field science you're doing, and that it all starts there, right? That's where identity comes from. That's where heritage is stored. And so when you're doing a field science with, any communities, right, that have a stake in the science that you're doing, but especially with Native communities, the three of us were talking about how important these things are. And when you're working with Native communities especially, we tend to think of soil and water, right, as life. It's central to identity and central to life, and it's literally required for life. And probably even more importantly, thinking about soil and water as teachers, right? That we are still learning things, whether you're an environmental scientist, a hydrologist, an archaeologist, that we are literally still, extracting information. We're still learning from soil and water. So they're teachers. And then again, soil and water in these homelands as your identity, right? These communities draw their identity from that, right? So you are learning. Soil and water are life-sustaining. They are our identity formers, and they're teachers. And so those of you who know Ryan, this won't be much of a surprise, but me and Lydia just we're really talking, and Ryan's just sitting there, and I see he's on his iPad. He's doing something. But he's like always doing that, so I don't know. I was just like not thinking much about it. I figured he was like answering emails or doing some other thing. And this conversation went on for a long time. And about 2 weeks later, I get there's no title in the subject line or anything, just an email from Ryan. And I opened it up, there's nothing. I was like, is this spam? And there's an attachment though. I opened the attachment, and Ryan, this is what Ryan was doing. He was capturing our conversation, and he was illustrating it. And so I like to show this and credit these conversations with other colleagues and projects with other tribes to show, like, this is the project that I'm going to talk with you about today, the LRAP. That this is how it's formed, and this is how it's unique. When we talk about the importance of Native communities being active participants in research, it's not just a nod, not tipping the cap to them. It's like, it's built in from the ground up, right? And like some of these perspectives are actually fundamentally different about how we envision the importance of things like land, water, and the archaeological record, which I'll get to. So all of that leads to, this is the best way I can try to create a visual comparison of, again, how community-engaged projects with tribal communities can approach things from a slightly different perspective. What you see on the left is a typical progression of the Western scientific method, right? Just like of science, right? It tends to be linear, starts with a question, you do lit reviews, right? You develop your hypotheses, your ideas about what you expect, you collect data, you analyze that data, test it against your hypotheses, and you revise those or publish your results, right? And there's a lot of great things about doing science this way, right? There's a lot of great things about Western science and this sort of model of producing and transmitting knowledge. But it's different, it tends to be different than what I think works best with a lot of Native communities, which is approaching research in a more cyclical manner. And that probably won't come to a surprise to most people in here, right? You probably have heard things about cyclical and relational, like worldviews as far as Native American culture goes, but this is deeper than that. It's really about actually modeling your research project accordingly to be more cyclical. And at the center of it, at the core of it, is the idea of relationships. And again, that's relationships to things like soil and water. Remember, like what I was showing you on those previous slides, and understanding their roles as teachers, and understanding the community that you're working with and for, and the idea that knowledge is a gift. That's one of the biggest differences, right? We're not necessarily always, or we shouldn't expect, or we shouldn't have a feeling of entitlement, being entitled to knowledge. Just because we can create a research project that can get at that knowledge, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're entitled to it. That you see knowledge as more, you approach it, and the etiquette surrounding it is more like a gift, right? Because soil and water can teach us things. Our ancestors still teach us things, right? When we excavate at archaeological sites that they created, it's like if you think about knowledge as like in a gift, in a context of being a gift, it changes your attitude, right? Nobody in here would go into your grandma's house, I hope, right, and just like take cookies, right? Like, if you do, watch out for that person. I don't know, but you treat that differently, right? Like, because it's a gift. You can use a different example, but it's a gift. It changes the etiquette all around it, right? So what happens when we treat scientific knowledge that way, right, and community knowledge? It changes the way that you interact with the community. It changes the way that you share your results. It changes the protocols that you go through before you share your results. All of these things, right? So again, LRAP starts from these sorts of kind of differing perspectives, right, that I find works best with, generally speaking, with Native communities. And so this is an image. What you're seeing here is an image from last summer at our archaeological site. It's where the LRAP project has been operating in Robeson County. It's near Bowie Mound. And what you're seeing here, I think, is a good example of all of this stuff that I'm telling you about, all of this, this preface about how we approach knowledge production a little differently and things like that, and how the idea of knowledge is a gift. And so what you're looking at here, we have a couple of App State students. I'm on a knee with a young Lumbee kid and his grandfather. And what we're doing here is we're teaching the young kid that, one, we're teaching him how archaeology works, because he's like 6 or 7 years old, but he's probably older now. I'm so bad with ages. He might be 13. No, he's like between 7 and 10, 90% sure. But he's a young kid, right? And he's like an aspiring paleontologist. Like every time he's been out there with LRAP students for like 2 years in a row now, and he's always bouncing around units telling people dinosaur facts. It's amazing. And so he's a smart kid, and so he wants to know about archaeology. So I'm teaching him like the same kind of stuff I'm teaching my students. This is how you dig a shovel test pit, which is what we're kneeling over. But at the end of that, though, I'm asking him here, does he remember what I told him the year before about what we do when we shut down and we fill in places where we've disturbed sites, right? Whether it's a shovel pit or a full excavation pit. And he did remember. He's explaining it back to me, which is offering gifts of cornmeal. This is just commercial cornmeal, but offering gifts of corn and in some cases tobacco. And so I think this is a great image to show you what LRAP is. It's engaging Lumbee citizens and the community around Robeson County in their own archaeology, and it's giving App State students a chance and an opportunity to learn from the get-go. They're learning how to do Archaeology 101. This is a basic archaeological field school course for aspiring archaeologists. And so they're learning how to do, App State students are learning, this is like, this wouldn't, I certainly didn't have these kind of opportunities when I was an undergraduate student, but like doing community archaeology and their understanding it of is like, that's just archaeology, because that's how they're learning it, right? How to work respectfully with any community, right? In this case, a Native community. So that's what I hope is a good explanation. I replaced a long bullet list of project goals with this picture. I hope it communicates it just as well as my bullet list. But Yeah, the more technical goals of LRAP is to increase the Lumbee TIPO's capacity to do research in our homelands, right? So the TIPO is concerned with documenting and protecting ancestral sites, knowing what is where. And so we're able to help the TIPO increase, we have more labor, right? We bring all these students down. We have the laboratory resources at App State to like analyze artifacts and things like that. And all that is being done in communication with the TIPO and helping them along with their governmental goals as well. So now that we've kind of framed framed LRAP and what we're all about, I want to get into the results of our field work thus far. And before we do that, frame existing knowledge about Lumbee history and North Carolina archaeology. This book is a synthesis of North Carolina archaeology. It's not alone in the fact that it doesn't acknowledge much of Lumbee history or claims to ancestral, sites and things like that. It just kind of it doesn't speak to those things very much. So why am I saying that? I'm saying that because this is another reason why LRAP is important. That we're going to write that history ourselves, right? This is an image. This is a pretty typical archaeological chart of culture history when you open up that book. It's not just the Lumbee, but you see a couple of question marks strewn across where they're saying, essentially what they're saying here, you have time down the one axis and existing tribes across the top, and their archaeological predecessors, right? So components that have been identified by archaeologists to be ancestral to those tribes they're identified when they can be. So the immediate ancestors, archaeologically speaking, of the Lumbee, there's a question mark there, right? So this is the late woodland period leading up to contact in that region. And so those late woodland ancestors are unknown. But the curious part, this is a book that I came across years ago, and I've thought about it. It kind of really stuck in my craw. This particular dynamic is curious to me that, you have archaeologists, they're admitting like a lack of knowledge about the late woodland ancestors to the Lumbee. But this is the same book. In the same book, they're talking about the sand burial phenomena, the sand burial mound phenomenon of the region through the Carolinas down into Georgia. Wet Morris is an archaeologist that worked at Bowie Mounds, aka Red Spring Mounds, in the late 70s. And she was doing salvage archaeology there after all the looting that I mentioned. But Wetmore found certain types of pottery similar to PD and Irene types at the Bowie Mound or Red Springs Mound in Robeson County. This is the curious part. So rather than assigning the sand burial mound complex of the coastal region to the Middle Woodland Cape Fear phase, we prefer to see it as a distinct yet unnamed late woodland cultural phenomenon extending southward into the coastal plains of South Carolina and Georgia. So to translate that, is some archaeological jargon in there, but in the same book, they're saying that the late woodland archaeological history of the Lumbee tribe is unknown, but yet they're working in Robeson County. I think there are 5 confirmed mounds in Robeson County that have been confirmed by archaeologists. I have a feeling there are many more than that, riding around Robeson County with the TIPO and pointing out, mounds and suspected mounds everywhere. But again, I give everyone the benefit of the doubt. I try to. I don't think this is like malicious, and I'm not implying that, or like that this is erasure or anything like that. I think people just bluntly and frankly, I think archaeologists sometimes can fall into a habit of not respecting Lumbee claims to our ancestral homelands. And I don't think that necessarily has to be from a malicious place, but it can happen inadvertently very easily. And so I'm not also saying that I have archaeological proof, that these sand burial mounds are a literal part of our ancestral history. But what I am saying is that I would start at least from an assumption that they very well may be, and to discount the fact, despite their location and their how long they were used. Some of these mounds were used and maintained, we think, archaeologists. There are artifacts in there from the late Archaic, early Woodland period. This is thousands of years ago. all the way up to potentially like late pre-contact. There are some pipes that have been found in some of these mounds that leave a possibility open that some of the last inclusions in some of these mounds may have happened after contact. So again, I'm not saying it's a airtight case, but this is the kind of stuff that we're up against where it's really easy, the kind of baseline assumption to kind of not consider our history. This is an image from this is a published paper, not from the same book, but it's talking about the same topic, the burial mounds, and this is showing some of the mounds throughout the region. And I just have the Lumbee and Cape Fear River highlighted there, and the location of the UNCP to kind of show you, anchor, how close some of these mounds are to kind of the cultural and governmental heart of the Lumbee tribe. So this brings me to talking about what existed out there about archaeology of the Lumbee before I started. This brings me to Dr. Stan Nick, and he's an exception here as far as archaeologist. He certainly did not ignore our presence when doing archaeology in Robeson County and surrounding areas. Dr. Nick, he published this. This is an excerpt from one of his publications about his archaeology in Robeson County. He was told by, unnamed archaeologist that had been working in North Carolina for a while. He was told this throughout the 90s that he wasn't going to find anything in Robeson County if he did archaeological surveys. And he didn't get into the reasoning for that, but he said that was an overwhelming kind of response by colleagues. It's like, what are you doing? What are you going to do down there? What do you expect to find? And despite those opinions, in the late 80s, early 90s, Dr. Nick did a series of archaeological surveys, the kind of first phase reconnaissance of an area that you don't know much about. He did a lot of surveys through Robeson County during that time. The result was after his surveys, even after counting his surveys, he had estimated that about 1% of the county had actually been surveyed professionally. And yet that small sample size, despite that small sample size, I believe he added like 300 sites to the state site files. And he had shown through the artifacts that he had found that were diagnostic to certain time periods that Robeson County had been occupied more or less continuously from what he could tell since the Paleo-Indian period. So you're talking about 12 or 13, 14,000 years ago. And that there are, very importantly, I believe there were about 32 sites out of the 300 new ones that he documented and reported that had late woodland period components, so artifacts and proof that people that were living during this time period were living there. Late woodland period, which in this area could run up all the way to contact potentially. That 31, 32, 33 of those sites had these late woodland period components with also colonial era artifacts alongside them. And Dr. Nick interpreted this as a strong indicator of cultural continuity through contact, right? This is a long quote, excuse me, I just don't really know how else to present this. This is an important quote from Dr. Nick in one of his books, one of his publications about the work he did when he's interpreting the archaeology, the result of his surveys in Robeson County. So Nick says, now consider 3 facts. First, in this collection of Robeson County archaeological sites, 31 have late woodland materials. Second, Angus McLean, along with others, wrote in the 1880s that when white settlers first arrived, they found located on the waters of the Lumbee, as the Lumber River was then called, a tribe of Indians speaking broken English. This was also published in O.M. McPherson. This is a early 20th century federal Indian agent who was charged with documenting Lumbee history for the American Congress. And third, many modern Lumbee are able to trace their genealogical ancestry back to that tribe of Indians. If we put these 3 facts together, it seems inescapable to conclude that the prehistoric people who left hundreds of archaeological sites here in the land of the Lumbee are indeed the ancestors of the living Lumbee. And so it's important to read this stuff and give Dr. Nick his credit because, again, it's not, he very deliberately just took our history and our culture seriously in the context of archaeology. And he provides a great framework for how to proceed with LRAP. And I was lucky enough to meet Dr. Nick, and he came out to one of our sites, our LRAP sites, recently, and he was really happy to see this work was being picked up again. So far we have done 5 total weeks of field work across 2 years, so that's a little work to contextualize that. It's not a lot of work, but we've discovered at our first site we went to, we discovered a multi-component woodland period site based on the artifacts. We processed the 7 radiocarbon dates from that site. Our App State students helped form our first community day, where we went out to UNC Pembroke and set up informational booths and kids games to explain archaeology to all age groups and to anyone in the entire Robeson County community. And we had a great turnout. People were really apparently interested in the archaeology in their town. App State students got to participate in a cultural burn with the Lumbee Cultural Burn Association. It's a prescribed burning, and visitors from the Yurok tribe from California. The Yurok have been burning, revitalizing their burn programs for decades now. So they've been among some of the first, my understanding, in the U.S. tribes bringing back the very, very ancient traditions of prescribed burning. Keeps your forest areas nice and tidy. It encourages the growth of fire-dependent species. There's all these different benefits. So the Lumbee, we started doing that again. So the Yurok came out. They sent visitors out all the way from California to help us and do a burn together. And they wanted to burn on our home and on our lands, and also teach us how some of the things that they've learned through decades of burning. So I'll give you an example of this. It was my second or third prescribed burn, and a Yurok guy my age had been burning for 20 years. He started when he was a kid. So he was telling me all of these things, technical, advice, and also more culturally, cultural advice, all these things. So that was cool. And App State students got to participate in that. Don't tell my dean. Pictures are gnarly, but it was totally 90% under control. But all jokes aside, both Lumbee and Yurok burners very professional and literally professionally trained. But yeah, they got to participate in that, right, and hear about basically ecology, and tending your land and that local ecology from a native perspective. So that was a big deal. App State students in 2024, the summer 2024, also got to participate in the agreement or treaty that was signed between the Catawba Nation and the Lumbee. And so the point in all of this is people have been really generous with bringing in App State students to sometimes intimate environments and in events. And so I think that those are foundational, informative, though, experiences, just like I had with the generosity of the Crow in their homeland, right? These are formative experiences for our students, and I think it's going to make them just that much better archaeologists, those that go on to become professional archaeologists. This is an example. These are some of the flyers and of the first community day at UNCP. These are some of the booths that we had set up with the community. This is out at one of the sites. That's the little mini paleontologist learning how to sieve with App State students, teaching him how. This is an image of the tribal council had requested that when we were formulating our memorandum of understanding and paperwork between App State and the tribe for this project, they had requested, one of the things they requested was that we give gifts of cornmeal when we disturb ground, right? At the end when we're closing things up. And so these are images of App State students doing just that. And I think another powerful image to show you, I think what I see is the power of LRAP and these types of projects is this student in the red shirt. He was a class clown, a respectful and good student, but just always joking. He was the center, the life of the party, always. And when I gave them their instructions and I said, you're welcome to do this if you want. If not, I'll go around and follow you as we're filling things up, and I'll do it. And they wanted to do it, and this student took his hat off all on his own, right? And there was not a snicker, not a laugh, and I didn't give him any instruction other than this is what tribal council wants us to do, and this is a little bit of explanation of why we're doing it. And he took that really seriously. And so again, these are the types of formative experiences that we're giving students working with Native communities. This is an image of just some of the community members out at one of the sites with App State students. So some of the results, a summary of some of the results of our field work. We already talked about that the site that we discovered. It was the first site we went to, and it happened, and it's a multi-component woodland site. And there may be a contact era component. So some of the artifacts that we found the last time we were out there over last year's spring break, or excuse me, this year's spring break, indicate that some of the pottery looks much later, and it may be a contact era component of that site. That's still being sorted out by myself doing the analysis. We're building one of the first radiocarbon chronologies of the area. They're not, certainly radiocarbon dates aren't very common on sites in this area. So to have 7 from one site, we're starting to tie that together. We've documented a very diverse assemblage of pottery at this one site. And so far, the preliminary analysis that I've done at App State in my lab with the artifacts that we found, some of the pottery especially, and the stone tools, a lot of the arrowheads, the projectile points, they're similar to the stuff that, like for instance, UNC Chapel Hill, RLA, or Research Laboratories of Archaeology, they've been doing a multi-decade project, a Sewin project throughout the Carolina Piedmont and other areas. A lot of the pottery looks like things that they've found, but I'm probably 5% through the artifacts, so there's a lot that we don't know yet. The site that we're working at is Site 31 RB 200. It's about 3 miles north of Pembroke. It's along Richland Swamp. The Bowie Mound is close by. You see the image of Bowie Mound in the swamp. The site is in this vicinity in this map that you're seeing. And the artifacts that we found there, as well as radiocarbon dates, indicate use of that site to differing extents going back about 8,000 years ago. And yeah, it's more of a strong feeling. But I would imagine that the occupations that we're documenting along Richland Swamp are probably people who at different times were maintaining and using Bowie Mound. This is you're looking at a burned feature. It's this semicircular platform shape that you're looking at, a feature, and it's you can't really tell from the photo, but it had burned, charred wood in it and things like that. It looks like a hearth or some sort of fire feature. And we got a radiocarbon date on that, actually 2 radiocarbon dates from different portions of the feature that both came back and agreed with one another. It's a little over 7,000 years old. This is another massive fire feature, a big fire that somebody made in the past. Artifacts all around it, a lot of stone tool making trash or debitage, right? Flakes coming off people touching up stone tools or making stone tools. And these are some of the logs. These are actually like intact logs of wood and charcoal in this burn feature. There's also some sort of organically stained pit that you can see off to the right. It may be a storage pit. It could be a trash pit. I collected the contents, the dirt of that, to be able to analyze with a colleague who specializes in the study of ancient plants and things like that. So we'll see what that pit is all about. But I, again, ran 2 different radiocarbon dates on this feature from different portions of it, and they both came back consistent, and it's about 3,700 years old. This feature, this is me and Harlan Lumbee Tippo. He is training and getting his master's right now to be a professional archaeologist himself at the University of South Carolina. And so here we are working on a pot that looks like it was broken in place, a ceramic pot. We have most of it. I haven't put it back together yet, but we got radiocarbon dates that I think are associated with that pottery. The radiocarbon dates are about 2,800 years old. But there's reason to believe that there are some problems with the radiocarbon dating in this environment that maybe just too much to get into right now, but we're thinking about alternative dating methods that I'll actually talk about a little later, because I have a suspicion that some of this pottery may not be that old. But in the field, in the moment, I was pretty confident that the carbon that I was dating was associated with that pottery. But sand, these sandy environments in the coastal plain, I'm learning, I think stuff moves around quite a bit. So it's a challenge, a methodological challenge that we're thinking through right now. This is, on the left, is a fragment of the rim of the pot that Harlan and I were working on. For the reasons I just explained, I'm unsure about the age. Maybe it is 2,800 years old. I think it might be younger than that, but we'll see. Also, a lot of small triangular points that typically, these are genuine arrowheads, as opposed to darts and spear points and larger items that we find out there as well. And some of these may be caraway points or Clarksville points, but these small triangular points typically are 600 or 700 years old and are made and used up through European contact. This is a closer, like a lab quality image of that same piece of pottery I was holding in the previous slide. It's cord marked, it's sand tempered, and I think this is an example of some of the stuff that I'm doing in the laboratory trying to describe the pottery under a microscope. You're looking at that pottery sherd very close up through a microscope, and I'm trying to identify and describe what we would call the paste recipe, the temper, the things people put in that pot and what made it unique. And so throughout this analysis, I'm beginning to wonder if some of this cord mark pottery is a little younger than 2,800 years old, and it looks like it could be a couple of different defined pottery types from North Carolina. It may be like some similar, the paste especially is similar to some paste recipes that were documented at sites of Siouan-speaking groups from UNC Chapel Hill and the Piedmont, like Dan River and things like that, the pottery types. But this also could be Cape Fear, which would make it a lot older and more towards the south and southeast. But these are the things that we're working out in the lab right now. We found some Czech stamp pottery. This is a description of how they treated the surface of that pot, right? So this is probably a carved wooden paddle that they've used to Czech stamp the surface of the pot. At first, we found several pieces of the Czech stamp stuff. These are some of the sherds that I think might be more recent, like contact era sherds. But when I first found them, I thought that they could be a type of pottery called Deptford Czech stamp, and it's very old. It's around 3,000 years old or 2,800 years old. Deptford is, and it's more popular in South Carolina and Georgia. But as I got into the lab and I started studying, again under the microscope, the paste, it's not consistent at all with some of those older types of pottery, Czech stamp pottery. And I'm starting to suspect that one possibility is it could be a type of pottery that, again, was identified by UNC Chapel Hill in the Piedmont at these Siouan sites called Old Town Czech stamp. Or it could be a kind of yet defined type of pottery. This is another separate Czech stamp sherd from Site 200, and another, I should have clarified, these 3D models, they're just that they are found from UNC Chapel Hill's Archaeology lab, where they recreate and put these things on the internet. So that's the Old Town type that I'm telling you about. These things were made in like the 1700s AD. So that's why it's important to sort that out and make sure that we're not making a typological mistake based on assumptions, because a 2,800-year-old sherd or 3,000-year-old Deptford sherd, you've made quite the mistake if you categorize a contact era sherd as that, right? So we're working through that, and it takes some time doing careful, what we call attribute first analysis of pottery in the lab. This is another comparison of a Deptford sherd that we have in our teaching collection at App State. So I was able to look at that under the same microscope, and you get a sense of the homogeneous sand tempering that Deptford sherds are typically made with. And this is the paste of the 31 RB200 sherd. It looks like it has actually grog tempering in it, which is crushed up pottery, old pottery that you then make into a new pot, along with some other inclusions, temper inclusions that aren't typical of Deptford and some of the older sherds, older types of pottery. This is just a close-up of that. The point here being that it doesn't look like it's Deptford, some of the older stuff. So some of the takeaways, again, these are preliminary, only 5 weeks of work, and have a lot of artifact analysis to do left. But the materials so far look qualitatively similar to the Siouan sites that have been researched so thoroughly by UNC Chapel Hill over the decades. And these findings would be consistent with past archaeological interpretations of Bowie Mound made by Ruth Wetmore and others. And these findings also, the idea that there are Siouan-speaking people in Robeson County, that's what I mean when I keep saying these findings. They're also consistent with Lumbee oral histories and 20th century, early 20th century federal Indian reports, right, reported at a Congress. So some of the next steps, we want to continue to establish chronologies for artifacts, continue this attribute first style of pottery analysis in the lab. Also want to try to figure out really quantitatively robust ways to source where the pottery and stone tools are coming from, where the clay that is used to make pottery, where those clay sources are. So to do some of that, I thought about some of the issues, the methodological issues we're having with radiocarbon dating. One of the alternatives that I'm considering is called optically stimulated luminescence dating, OSL dating. And what happens basically is sand grains, when they're exposed to the sun, they trap solar radiation in the form of electrons in their internal crystalline lattice, like at a microscopic scale. When those sand grains are buried or covered or otherwise obstructed from the sun, they cease absorbing that radiation and they hold it. So when in an OSL lab, that's a lot like a dark room, like a photography lab, when they expose these sherds to heat or light again, the electrons luminesce, and they can, measuring the energy of that, measuring the energy of that release, they can use it like a clock and tell when those sand grains were last exposed to the sun. So the way this works with pottery, if I'm unsure about carbon that isn't a part of that artifact, if I'm unsure about the association of the carbon date that I'm getting with that artifact or that event, we're considering dating the sherds directly by sending the sherds, these pottery sherds, to OSL labs, and they take the sand grains out of the interior of the pot and doing this, and it's going to tell you essentially when the pot was made, right? So this is an image of Harlan in his workshop. He's also a potter, and so I've been working with Harlan and other Lumbee potters to identify wild clay sources in Robeson County, and we're building like a geochemical catalog for XRD and XRF analysis, these laboratory analyses that can tell you where clay came from. So we can eventually, when we build this catalog of comparative wild clay sources up, we can take pot sherds in, right? So we get an OSL date. Now we want to know where they made locally on local clays. We can take those in and we can start matching them to clay sources or not in Robeson County. Same thing with stone tool sourcing, where we're going to start trying to use things like VNIR to source the the geologic sources of where some of the stone is coming from. I can already tell like 90% of it is rhyolite from the URs, but we'll do it, we'll do it that way. We'll do it with lasers. So I'll finish up here with connecting these findings with Lumbee history. Sorry for another long quote, but it's an important one. This is by John Swanton. He was a famous anthropologist around the late 1800s, early 1900s, and a student of the history of southeastern American Indians. And this is an excerpt from his report to Congress and what would become like the BIA in 1933 on Lumbee history. At that time, it was called Croatan. And he's interpreting here oral history by a Lumbee man named Wash Lowry in 1914. It was recorded by a previous Indian agent named O.M. McPherson. And essentially what he's saying here, John Swanton is interpreting Wash, when he answered O.M., the Indian agent McPherson's question, like, tell me who you are, where do you come from? John Swanton interpreted that as this movement that we know happened of Siouan-speaking groups like the Sherall and these other much smaller and less known tribes that used to hang around and run with the Sherall, like the Eno, the Shakori, the Kiawe. So Swanton, with his historical the knowledge he has of all of these movements, he's saying what Wash told that Indian agent McPherson, he's describing his ancestors coming from the Dan River and Roanoke River in that area during the early 1700s, when we know all these Siouan groups are moving south for a number of reasons, including intertribal conflict with like the Seneca and Iroquoian groups, also conflict with settlers and disease and things. And so This is another kind of related to that history that gets us a little further into the 1700s. This is by an anthropologist named Jack Campisi. He worked on one of the Lumbee federal petitions as an expert anthropologist, and he's talking about the Sherrall settlement. And again, here, like Swanton here, we can probably think of it's either, if it's not the Sherrall, it's the Sherrall and all these other Siouan-speaking groups that, again, that were kind of probably being misidentified by outsiders, but all of these Siouan groups that are moving around the landscape together, including but not limited to the Sherrall. And so Dr. Campisi says a document written in 1771 refers to the Sherrall settlement on Drowning Creek, that's the Lumbee River, the headwaters of the Lumbee River. And another document dated to 1773 contains a list of names that connect that community to the Sherrall earlier in 1737. And then a list of Lumbee surnames, common surnames that appear in that Sherrall settlement to connect with the Sherrall Indians. And so what I'm telling you here is this is going back to James Mooney, another famous late 19th century anthropologist. And this map showing the Sara, the Sherrall, and these, again, when we're seeing that name, it's more than them. It's the Kiowa, it's the Shikori, it's the Eno. All these people are leaving the Dan River and Roanoke valleys of Virginia and north central Carolinas, and they're coming down, particularly the Sherrall, are being documented very nearby the site we're working at, but like up on the upper reaches of the PD and in that area. And that's, again, how John Swanton and others interpreted that. So I think this is what our archaeology is getting to. And if not this literal site that we're on, certainly we will find these sites, I'm confident, that tie in and really contextualize Lumbee history through archaeology. I'm finishing up here. I'm running longer than I wanted to. I apologize. But connecting this to Lumbee history, this is Reverend Dolly Maynor. He passed away in 1984, and he was the director of missions for Burnt Swamp Baptist Church Association. So Reverend Maynor was known to speak Siouan phrases in his help me out. What am I? Sermons. I'm not a heathen. I'm just been talking too long. In his sermons, thanks, Maggie. He was known to speak Siouan phrases. One that was particularly associated with his sermons was Eptatewa Niwasin, and it means, I've heard this translated a couple of different ways by Lumbee elders that I know, but I've heard it translated to things like, I love the one who died on the cross, I love you, Creator. I've heard it has that general meaning. And Reverend Maynor told interviewers that he was taught that phrase and other Siouan phrases by Susan Dahl, his great-grandmother, who was born in 1830. So we're pushing back, from the archaeology and the ethnohistory of the movement of Siouan-speaking people, and then pushing, bridging that gap with living, relatively recently living Lumbees and interviews and things like that. This is an image of some of our community outreach with LRAP, teaching Lumbee kids archaeological exercises like how to make stone tools and things like that. This is more of the same. These are school group with the UNCP REACH program, or Mainstream Academy. And this is the last thing. This was their thank you for the presentation that we gave them. They're singing Amazing Grace in Siouan. So some of our future plans is locating some of the things that some of these early federal reports talked about, as far as some of the oldest villages that were documented by a lot of the Scottish Highlanders that were some of the first to kind of settle Robeson County. And these, quote-unquote Indian tribe that they met there, talking about how they had their principal settlement was on the Lumbee River, and they had all of these large, well-built roads and paths that connected these settlements on the Lumbee with places as far as I've read in other places, modern-day Fayetteville. A lot of these roads are probably like Highway 74, we're probably not going to find the roads, but if we can kind of just start looking through an archaeological lens for some of these ancestral villages, that's what I'm interested in going forward. So yeah, I wanted to close with that same image and bring you back to what we're doing at LRAP and what I'm most proud of, and it's our community outreach, especially with young Lumbee kids. and then growing up with a better opinion of archaeologists than maybe would be typical of Native Americans in the past. And that is it. I appreciate your time today.
We do have some time for questions, so I can take the mic to anybody in the room that has any questions. My man.
Yes, sir.
Since you have it listed at the bottom of your acknowledgments, there was a reference that you made of, I guess, some sort of publication of Dr. Nix that was dated 2000. I was wondering what that source was for that. Is there
Sure.
a particular journal or other source for that?
No, so my understanding is that one and his other publications that report on his surveys and his work with the Lumbee, they're mostly published out of UNCP and not in a journal. They're published out of a now, like it's been renamed and remodeled. It was like the American Indian Studies. I mean, that still exists. It's some other like institute within UNCP that doesn't appear to exist anymore. But if you're interested in them, I have digital copies. I can send anyone who wants them emails of them. Yeah. So please, I can give you my email too, especially after the talk. If you want. Can be found online too.
Anyone else? Okay.
Hi, I work for NC Land and Water Fund,
Yes, ma'am.
and we would like to partner with the different tribes in North
Yeah.
Carolina, and it's very hard to get through.
I believe that.
So what do we do to make that better? I
That's a
mean, we
gr-
do finally have some, I think he's from the Lumbee tribe.
Mm-hmm.
He's on the Natural Heritage Advisory Board, but we're going to have an opening on our trust
Yes.
fund board next year. So maybe you could find somebody who would like to get on our board and help bridge that gap.
Yes,
So that
ma'am.
we can reach through to them.
Yes, ma'am. And that's a common dynamic, just with reaching out to tribes and not hearing back or hearing limited interest. And it's stuff that you probably already know, but I mean, like they're stretched, like Harlan, for instance, Harlan Chavis, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, he is stretched so wildly thin that they just have their hands full most of the time. But you know, that still though, I'm happy to whatever it's worth. It may be worth nothing, but I can try to mediate that and try to get an introduction where somebody will like reply to you if that helps. But I appreciate you trying, and I hope you continue to try. And I'm happy to help get the word out about that opening.
Anyone else? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Seth. Linda Carnes McNaughton, a retired cultural resource manager from Fort Bragg.
Great.
So we did extensive studies on the Fort Bragg properties to 25,000 acres on lithic and clay sourcing studies that we Fort Bragg partnered with the RLA. And those studies are pretty extensive on sourcing, lithic sourcing for the materials off of Fort Bragg proper, as well as clay sourcing studies. So you may be familiar with them or getting them through the RLA.
So I'm just starting to look into all this work that was done around Bragg by you and your colleagues and RLA's involvement. I actually just had the opportunity to have a long phone conversation with Joe Herbert. I don't know if you know, but
Yes,
yeah, I figured.
I worked with Joe for 20 years.
Yeah, so I am using Joe's approach to ceramic analysis in the Carolinas. I'm using his protocol, and so his books and his work has been really helpful to me. And so I've been building that relationship with Joe. And so I imagine I hope that all leads to like opening up kind of new ideas and avenues for LRAP.
Yeah, those resources are in public domain now, so
Great.
they're available for
I'll have to look
researchers.
into those.
And also, we did some extensive studies on early travel corridors as they crossed Harnett County, Cumberland County into the west. So some of those early travel corridors, that information is also out there available.
Okay.
And I worked on the Siouan project.
Yes.
For many years.
Great.
I analyzed European artifacts off of those sites.
We really need to. How do you feel about visiting App State? Why don't you come look at some
I'm
of this stuff?
retired now. I'm volunteering in the OSA lab. That's why I'm here today.
Come up to the mountains, do a little mountain vacation.
Okay, we might have time for one more if anybody's got any questions. Okay, I think we're good. Before we end here, first of all, let me say that I just want to thank this man for his service, his military service.
Thank you.
Dr. Grooms, with it being A250 next year, he is carrying forward a long tradition of American Indians in North Carolina that have fought in every single war in the history of this country. So I want to thank him for his service. But I also want to present you with a gift. There was a lot of talk about a gift in your speech, but Secretary Cashwell put together this swag bag for you.
Thank you.
And it's got a couple of different things from different programs, but it also has a hardcover book of Nancy Strickland Chavis's exhibition that was at the North Carolina Museum of Art, To Take Shape and Meaning. But also from us in this, we got you, on behalf of the AIHC staff, some sacred tobacco from Coharie land.
Thank you.
I got it from my cousin, so.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.